The moment the world changed for Grace Miller wasn't marked by sirens or fire or flashing lights. It was marked by silence. Deafening, paralyzing silence. 1 second she was driving home from the night shift, exhausted but determined, her EMT badge still clipped to her collar, Eli's favorite cereal in the passenger seat. The next, darkness. She remembered the sudden screech of tires, the violent blur of headlights, a spinning sensation, and then nothing. When she woke, the hospital room felt alien, cold, and still. Tubes snaked from her arms, a monitor beeped rhythmically to her right, and a dull ache pulsed through her lower back. A nurse stood at the end of her bed, clipboard in hand, her smile kind but rehearsed. "Grace, I need you to stay calm," she said gently. "You've been in an accident. You suffered a spinal cord injury. The doctors believe the paralysis may be permanent." That was it. No dramatic pause, no moment to prepare. Just a few simple words that split her life in two. Panic rose like bile. Grace tried to sit up but couldn't. She tried to wiggle her toes. Nothing. Her fingers gripped the bed rail tightly, but her body betrayed her from the waist down. "No," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I have a son. I have to," but the nurse only lowered her eyes, and Grace knew. That night, as the fluorescent lights hummed overhead and machines kept time with her heartbeat, she stared at the ceiling and tried to imagine a life without movement. No more running after Eli at the park, no more hoisting stretchers into ambulances, no more dancing barefoot in the kitchen while pancakes sizzled on Sunday mornings. She had lost everything. She had no husband, no savings, and no family nearby. Just a growing fear that her son would see her not as a mother, but as a burden. 2 weeks later, she was discharged with a loaner wheelchair from the hospital, clunky and stained, its right wheel slightly warped so it veered left unless she overcompensated. The social worker told her the good chairs, motorized, custom-fit, the ones you could actually live in, cost thousands. Insurance wouldn't cover them. "We'll put in an appeal," she said with a sympathetic shrug, which was code for, "Don't get your hopes up." At home, the apartment she'd once kept spotless became a battlefield. Rugs curled under the wheels. The bathroom was an obstacle course. Eli, only 9, tried to help. He carried dishes, sorted laundry, even learned to microwave frozen dinners without burning the edges. But Grace saw the way he looked at her now, as if waiting for her to get back up. As if this was temporary. Her pride made her snap at him sometimes, and then cry when he was asleep. The worst part was feeling trapped in her own body, trapped by bills she couldn't pay, trapped by the knowledge that everything she had worked for was slipping away like sand through her fingers. And yet, somewhere in that bleak haze of fear and fatigue, something unexpected happened. One night, unable to sleep, she scrolled through social media on her cracked phone. She had sold her iPad a week earlier for grocery money. Her thumb stopped on a news story that made her blink and sit up straighter in bed. Elon Musk announces sub-$200 Tesla wheelchair, mobility should be a human right. Her heart pounded. The article detailed a sleek, revolutionary design being developed by Tesla engineers, lightweight, AI-integrated, solar charging capabilities, designed for rugged terrain and city sidewalks alike. Musk was quoted saying, "We spend billions on self-driving cars, yet most of the world still can't afford a basic mobility device. That's insane." Grace reread the quote 3 times. She clicked the video embedded in the article. There he was, speaking from a stage with the Tesla logo behind him, his tone matter-of-fact but passionate. "We're launching the Tesla Mobility Initiative," he said. "Our goal is to make the world's most advanced wheelchair available to the people who need it most, for under $200, thanks to scalable production and government partnerships." For the first time in weeks, Grace felt something other than despair. She felt a flicker of curiosity, of impossible hope. What if it were real? What if she could afford something that didn't make her feel like a patient or a prisoner? The next morning, over cold toast and instant coffee, she pulled out a notebook and began writing. It started as a journal entry but quickly became something else, a letter. "Dear Elon Musk," she began. "I don't expect you to read this, but I'm writing because I have nothing left to lose." She told him everything. About the accident. About Eli. About the nights she cried herself to sleep and the days she wanted to give up. About the warped loaner chair that made her feel broken in ways her body hadn't already. She didn't write it to go viral. She wrote it because sometimes, putting pain into words made it smaller, like drawing a monster to scale. She posted the letter online and closed her phone. That afternoon, she and Eli walked, he walked, to the soup kitchen for a hot meal. The power had been cut off at home that morning. She tried not to let him see her cry when they returned to a dark apartment. But that night, something extraordinary happened. Her phone buzzed with a flood of notifications. Her post had been shared thousands of times. People were commenting from around the world, veterans, caregivers, tech enthusiasts, mothers. One message stood out. "I work at Tesla Mobility. DM me. We need to talk." Grace stared at the screen. Her hands trembled. She clicked the message. It was from someone named Ravi Patel, an engineer whose profile was filled with posts about robotics, accessibility, and user-centered design. His message was short, but sincere. "Your story moved our entire team. We're selecting early users to test the prototype. We want you in." She stared at the message for a long time, barely breathing. This couldn't be real. She was nobody. Just another disabled woman slipping through the cracks of a broken system. But the message didn't disappear. It remained there, glowing softly in the darkness of her small apartment, like a beacon. Grace exhaled for what felt like the first time in weeks. Maybe, just maybe, the world hadn't forgotten her after all. Maybe she wasn't invisible. She turned to Eli, asleep beside her on the worn-out couch, his small hand still resting on her blanket. She whispered, "We're not done yet." And to the universe, or whoever was listening, she made a silent vow: if she got this second chance, she wouldn't just take it. She'd run with it, even if she had to roll every step of the way. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? Her name is Grace Miller, and before the world put her in a chair, she was the one carrying others. She moved through chaos with steadiness, through tragedy with calm. She had a quiet presence that comforted patients in the back of ambulances at 2 a.m., the kind of person who didn't flinch when bones jutted out of flesh or when mothers screamed for their children. As an EMT in Columbus, Ohio, Grace was known for her grit, her quick thinking, and her capacity to care. But before she was any of that, before the uniform and the late-night runs and the burn of adrenaline, she was just a girl from Lancaster. Raised by her grandfather, Walter Miller, a retired Marine and proud double amputee who rolled through life with the same sharp sense of humor he used to fight Nazis, Grace grew up watching what real strength looked like. Her mother, Lisa, had disappeared when Grace was 7, leaving only a note that read, "I'm sorry, I can't do this." No one ever found her. Grace never forgave her. Her father was a name on a birth certificate and nothing more. Walter stepped in without hesitation. He taught Grace how to shoot a BB gun, change a tire, fish for bass, and fix a leaky pipe, all from his wheelchair. When kids at school made jokes about her crippled grandpa, Grace bloodied more than one nose. Walter didn't scold her. He just said, "That's my girl." His chair wasn't a symbol of weakness, it was a badge of survival. She never imagined she'd end up in one too. As she grew older, Grace learned to bottle her feelings, wear resilience like armor, and protect her heart by pretending it didn't need protecting. She dated a few guys in her 20s, but none stuck around. Most couldn't handle her long shifts or her independence. Some tried to clip her wings. She left them all. Then came Adam. He was a paramedic who transferred into her unit one spring. Tall, steady, with a crooked grin and a voice like warm gravel. For a while, Grace thought she'd finally found someone who saw her, not just the capable woman, but the scarred girl underneath. They fell hard. He moved in. They made plans. Then Eli came, unexpected but not unwelcome. For the first time, Grace imagined a future that didn't feel like a war. She started buying baby clothes. She imagined teaching her son how to drive, how to stand up for himself, how to love a woman the right way. And then Adam left. 6 weeks before Eli was born. No fight. No warning. Just a note on the kitchen table that said, "I'm not ready." It was déjà vu history repeating itself with sharp edges. But this time, Grace refused to crumble. She gave birth alone. She named the baby Eli because it sounded strong. She worked double shifts to stay afloat, brought Eli to daycare in her uniform, breastfed him in the back of the ambulance on breaks, and rocked him to sleep with sore arms and a tired voice. Every time she looked at him, she reminded herself, "I'm not my mother. I stay." And she did. Through fevers and first steps, kindergarten tears, and scraped knees. When other moms whispered about her not showing up to PTA meetings, she bit her tongue and worked a few more hours to pay for Eli's field trip. She didn't need recognition. She just needed her son to feel safe. He was her reason. He still is. The apartment they shared was small, but full of life, crayon drawings on the fridge, science kits stacked in the corner, a squeaky ceiling fan that hummed through the night. Eli was obsessed with space. Posters of Mars and Saturn covered his bedroom wall. He once asked if she could drive an ambulance to the moon. Grace laughed so hard she cried. When the accident happened, Eli had just passed 3rd grade with honors. He was reading at a 6th grade level. She'd promised to take him to the local planetarium that summer. Instead, he spent it helping her onto the toilet and watching cartoons with the volume down while she tried to sleep through the pain. It killed her. Not the paralysis, not the struggle, those were brutal, yes. But what truly gutted her was watching the light in his eyes dim just a little every time she failed to reach the sink, every time she dropped a plate and cursed under her breath, every time she had to ask him to help her do something no 9-year-old should have to. She tried to shield him from it, but kids always know. They sense when the air has changed. They hear the things you try to hide in silence. That's why, when Tesla contacted her, she didn't hesitate. She may not have believed in fairy tales, but she believed in chances. And she needed one now more than ever. That night, after reading the message from Ravi, Grace spent hours researching. She read every article on the Tesla wheelchair, watched every clip, scanned every tweet. She learned that the prototype used AI-assisted stabilization to prevent tipping, had adjustable seating controlled by voice command, a foldable solar panel for on-the-go charging, and was designed by a team of engineers who had worked on SpaceX robotics. The vision was to provide autonomy, not just mobility. Independence, not just movement. It sounded like science fiction. But the testimonials from other testers, veterans, accident survivors, amputees, were compelling. Some had rolled across hiking trails. One woman took hers on a flight and navigated an entire airport solo. Another man said he could finally take his dog for a walk again. Grace wanted that. Not just for herself, but for Eli. She wanted to be the mom who showed up again. Who cooked breakfast without needing help. Who could walk him to school, even if it was rolling. She wanted to show him that life didn't end when your body failed you. It just changed. The next day, she called the number Ravi had given her. His voice was young, excited, kind. "We've been following your story," he said. "We've got a spot for you in the pilot program. It's in Fremont. We'd fly you out, cover accommodations, do a full assessment and fitting. You'd be helping shape the next generation of mobility." Grace's throat tightened. I can't afford to get there. I have a kid. I can't leave him behind. There was a pause. Then, let me make some calls. We'll figure it out. She didn't want charity. She wanted purpose. But something in Ravi's tone told her this wasn't a handout, it was an invitation. That night, she told Eli. His eyes lit up like she hadn't seen in months. Does this mean you'll be like a robot superhero, Mom? She laughed. Something like that, kid. She didn't sleep at all. Her mind raced with images, her gliding down the grocery aisle, surprising Eli at school, visiting her grandfather's grave and telling him she finally understood. But doubt crept in too. What if it was a scam? What if she wasn't good enough? What if she failed, again, in front of the whole world this time? But then she remembered her grandfather's voice, raspy from years of cigars and wisdom. Fear doesn't mean you stop. It just means you're alive enough to care. Her name is Grace. She was born with nothing and survived everything. And now, against every odd, she was being given the chance to move again. Not just her body, but her story. And maybe, if she was brave enough, she could move the world with it too. Grace didn't know that rock bottom had levels until she tried living at the bottom of them. After the accident, every day was a negotiation with gravity, guilt, and grief. Getting out of bed wasn't just hard, it was a mission. If she turned the wrong way, her body screamed. If she stayed too long in one position, her skin felt like it was on fire. The bathroom became a battlefield. The apartment, once cozy, now felt like a cruel maze. The hallway was too narrow. The stove knobs too high. Her once-loved recliner too soft to escape without a struggle. And then there was the wheelchair. Not the Tesla one promised in sleek renderings and glowing PR videos, but the beat-up hospital hand-me-down with scuffed wheels and a persistent squeak that reminded her every turn how temporary, how discarded she was. Eli tried to help. God, he tried. He would push her gently into the kitchen and bring her a chipped mug of instant coffee with too much sugar. He learned how to tie her sneakers because she couldn't lean far enough. He carried the laundry basket like a little soldier and tried to smile even when the power went out and the freezer began to thaw. But Grace could see the weight settling on his small shoulders, pressing down like the world had mistaken him for a man. He was too young to carry this. She was supposed to carry it. And she couldn't. The first shut-off notice came 2 weeks after she left the hospital. The second came a week after that. Grace made calls, pleaded with the electric company, tried to juggle payment plans with grocery bills and Eli's asthma meds. Her disability application was in process. Her insurance appeal had gone nowhere. The department she used to work for sent flowers. That was it. No check. No calls. No visits. Flowers. She stared at them as they wilted on her windowsill and wondered if that's how the world saw her now, something to be mourned and forgotten. Her pride screamed at her not to ask for help. But hunger and survival shouted louder. She went to the local food pantry on a Friday morning, cheeks burning with shame. She rolled up behind a line of weathered faces, hoping no one would recognize her. Inside, the fluorescent lights buzzed and volunteers smiled too hard. "You're doing the right thing," one woman whispered as she placed cans in Grace's reusable bag. Grace nodded and hated herself. That night, dinner was canned ravioli and powdered lemonade. Eli said it was awesome. She could barely eat. She started avoiding mirrors. Her face had changed. There were new lines around her mouth, purple moons under her eyes, a tension in her jaw that never left. She hated the pity in people's eyes. Hated how the world suddenly slowed down when she rolled into a store or clinic or school office. People talked to her like she was fragile. Like she was an object. She wanted to scream, "I used to save lives. I was someone. Now I'm a statistic with wheels." When the rain leaked through the ceiling during a thunderstorm, she finally broke. She curled into herself on the couch, ignoring the wet drip that echoed through the living room, and sobbed until her chest hurt. Eli crept beside her and didn't say anything. He just tucked himself under her arm and held her hand. They stayed like that all night. In the morning, the couch was damp, and the world was still broken, but she made breakfast anyway. Burned toast. Runny eggs. A peace offering. Eli smiled like it was the best meal in the world. Later that day, she found a stack of mail shoved in their box. One envelope was from the landlord. Final notice. The eviction clock had started. 17 days. Grace stared at the number like it was a death sentence. She could hear her grandfather's voice again, firm and dry, "No one's coming." That voice had always been her compass. Even when he died, on a Tuesday morning when she was 24 and working the early shift, his lessons lived on. Pain doesn't wait for you to be ready. And neither does the rent. The apartment wasn't much, but it was theirs. She had brought Eli home here from the hospital. They had danced to Aretha in the kitchen on birthdays. The corner of the hallway still had his crayon height chart. Losing it would mean not just a roof, but the last remnants of a life she built with her bare hands. She needed a miracle. And then, in a twist she would one day call fate, came the message from Tesla. Not just the message from Ravi offering her a chance, but the explosion of attention that came after her letter went viral. One night she was invisible. The next, she was on the homepage of Reddit. People from Chicago to Seattle to Manila were reposting her story. Some called her brave. Others called her a hero. A few called it fake. She ignored the noise. The GoFundMe campaign, created by a stranger, a woman named Jessica in Oregon who read her letter, had raised nearly $6,000 in 3 days. Grace cried harder at that than she had the night of the eviction notice. Strangers were sending her hope in $5 increments. She read every comment. "You remind me of my mom. You're showing my daughter what strength looks like. This isn't just about a wheelchair. This is about all of us." She didn't know what to do with the kindness. She had built her whole life on self-reliance. Now, letting go of that felt like betrayal. But she looked at Eli, who needed stability, and decided that pride couldn't feed a child. She contacted Ravi. Told him she was ready. He asked for her measurements, her medical records, her availability. She told him about Eli. He didn't hesitate. "Bring him. Tesla will cover it. We've got a housing partner nearby." That same day, the electric company finally shut off their power for good. Grace packed their clothes in silence, using her phone light to see. Eli clutched his backpack and a drawing of a rocket ship he'd made in 2nd grade. They slept that night in a neighbor's basement, a kind woman named Denise who used to bring pies over on holidays. "You've got angels watching you," Denise whispered as she tucked an extra blanket over them. Grace didn't believe in angels. But she believed in people. And sometimes, that was enough. The next morning, a volunteer from a disability rights nonprofit arrived in a van to take them to the airport. Grace had never flown before. She was terrified. Not of the plane, but of what came next. Would she be a lab rat? Would the chair even work for her? Would Eli be safe? Would they come home better, or broken all over again? She didn't know. But what she did know was that staying meant losing everything. And going, even with all its risk, meant the possibility of something more. So she kissed the Ohio sky goodbye and wheeled into the unknown. She looked at Eli as they boarded, his eyes wide with wonder as he stared at the planes. "Mom," he whispered, "do you think it'll really work?" Grace smiled through her fear. "I think it already is." The sky over San Jose shimmered with early morning haze, that strange fusion of tech-fueled energy and coastal stillness that Grace had only seen in movies. The airport was buzzing, fluorescent, and overwhelming, with voices echoing off every surface and announcements blaring over intercoms that she could barely hear over the pounding of her heart. The wheelchair she was using had been banged around during the flight, and the right wheel now squealed like a wounded animal every few turns. Eli pushed their suitcase in front of her, navigating with an odd kind of practiced alertness, a child acting far older than his 9 years. A Tesla mobility staffer named Paul met them near baggage claim holding a sign that said, Grace plus Eli Miller. He was younger than she expected, maybe late 20s, in a black polo with a subtle Tesla logo over the chest and sneakers that looked like they'd never touched dirt. He greeted them with a wide smile, a nervous edge in his voice, and 2 bottles of chilled water. It's really good to meet you, Grace. We've all been talking about you for weeks. You're kind of a legend around the office. Grace blinked. I'm not sure what that means. Paul chuckled and held the door for her as they moved toward the curb. It means you reminded us why we started this in the first place. The drive to Fremont was long, but smooth, like gliding through some strange, futuristic world. As the car curved past tech campuses with sleek glass buildings and electric shuttles humming down the streets, Grace stared out the window and tried to connect what she saw with the struggle she'd just left behind. Her mind couldn't quite keep up. It was like being dropped into someone else's life. Silicon Valley was another planet, one where people didn't ask, do you have insurance, but instead, what do you want to change about the world? When they arrived at the Tesla Mobility Lab, it didn't look like a factory or a clinic. It looked like an idea that had exploded and spread across metal and glass and light. The building was low, wide, glowing with natural sunlight through massive windows, and filled with the buzz of invention. Inside, it smelled like copper and coffee. Grace rolled in behind Paul, clutching her bag, heart pounding. Eli stared at everything like he'd walked into a dream. A prototype hung from a ceiling harness in the main lobby, sleek and metallic, with curved carbon fiber arms and illuminated trim like something out of a sci-fi movie. It didn't look like a wheelchair. It looked like something you'd fight aliens in. Whoa, Eli whispered. That's what you're gonna ride? Paul grinned. That's one of them. Your mom's getting something even better. A woman stepped out of the hallway at that moment, tall, dark hair cropped short, expression intense but warm. Grace, she said. I'm Mira. Head of the user experience team. You're finally here. Grace reached out instinctively to shake her hand. Mira leaned down and clasped it gently. Her palm was calloused, her grip firm. I'm also a pilot tester, Mira added, stepping back to reveal her own chair, a sleeker, titanium-framed design fitted perfectly to her body. Spinal injury from a climbing fall. C7 complete. That was 7 years ago. Grace felt her mouth go dry. For a moment, she couldn't speak. Seeing Mira, powerful and poised, not just working in this place but leading it, it felt like a glimpse into a future Grace hadn't dared imagine. Mira motioned them down the hallway. We've got your room set up in the guest quarters. Let's get you settled, then we'll do some baseline assessments tomorrow. The next few hours blurred. They were taken to a dorm-style suite that smelled faintly of new paint and fresh linens. The bed was adjustable. The shower had rails and a seated bench. A welcome basket sat on the table filled with snacks, toiletries, and a handwritten note, "You belong here." Grace didn't know when the tears started. Maybe it was the way Mira looked at her without pity. Maybe it was the lack of tension in every interaction, the absence of that thin veil of discomfort people always wore around her now. Here, she wasn't a burden. She wasn't broken. She was a collaborator. After dinner, Eli curled up on the couch with his sketch pad and began drawing what he called, the next Tesla wheelchair, version 5. Grace sat by the window and stared out at the Pacific horizon. The sun had just dipped beneath the skyline, casting long shadows that made the lab look even more surreal. She closed her eyes and inhaled deeply. For the first time in what felt like years, she didn't feel like she was running from something. She was moving toward something. The next morning began with a physical assessment led by a cheerful occupational therapist named Darren. He talked Grace through muscle sensitivity, torso control, arm strength, and core balance. She performed each task with laser focus, aware of every tremor and hesitation in her limbs, aware of Mira watching silently from the corner, taking notes on a tablet. Then came the introduction to the prototype. It sat in a private lab space under a skylight that poured golden morning light across its frame. Matte black, ultra-lightweight, with modular armrests, adaptive grips, a fold-out solar wing in the back, and a heads-up voice interface that responded to 12 different languages. It was, simply put, a marvel. "We call it the Horizon," Ravi said, stepping into the room with a grin and a remote tablet in his hands. He was short, energetic, wearing a hoodie and wire-rimmed glasses. "Because when we started, the dream felt out of reach. Now it's right in front of us." Grace reached out to touch the side of the chair. It was cool, smooth, humming faintly with internal circuitry. "It looks like a spaceship," she said quietly. Ravi laughed. "It kind of is." The next few hours were a whirlwind of adjustments, sensor calibrations, harness fittings, and learning how the neural assist features worked. The Horizon used a combination of joystick and gyroscopic input, meaning it could anticipate micro-movements and shift weight accordingly. For someone like Grace, who had partial core strength, it meant a far more responsive ride than traditional powered chairs. When she finally transferred into it, it fit like a glove. And when she moved, just a gentle nudge of her wrist and a lean of her shoulder, the chair obeyed like an extension of her will. She glided forward. Backward. Pivoted. The motion was so fluid it made her laugh out loud. Eli clapped from the doorway, grinning so hard his cheeks dimpled. "You're like Iron Woman," he shouted. Grace beamed. Mira and Ravi shared a look. "That's what we're going for," Ravi said. For the rest of the day, she practiced in a closed course, rolling over ramps, testing terrain modes, learning emergency stop functions. There were hiccups. Her hands cramped. The seat sensors took some getting used to. At one point, the voice interface misheard a command and spun her in a circle. But even the mistakes felt like progress. Each one brought her closer to control. Closer to freedom. That night, back in her room, she lay awake staring at the ceiling while Eli slept peacefully beside her. Her body ached, but it was the good kind of pain, the kind that comes from effort, not defeat. She thought of everything it had taken to get here. The hospital. The silence. The shame. The eviction. The food lines. The message from Ravi. The flight across the country. The door that had opened. And she thought about the door she now stood in front of, the one no one else could open for her. Not even Elon Musk. Not even Tesla. This was her moment to step through, not on legs, maybe, but in a way just as powerful. She whispered, "We're not just surviving anymore, kiddo. We're coming back." In the silence, the chair beside her emitted a soft glow from its control panel, as if waiting for what came next. The first real test came 2 days later on a bright, windless morning that felt more like spring than summer. The Horizon had been recalibrated based on Grace's early performance data, her posture rescanned, her sensitivity points logged with an almost obsessive attention to detail. Ravi said it was all part of the process. They wanted this to feel like a second skin, not a machine she had to command. Grace hadn't cried in front of anyone since the accident, but when she rolled the Horizon down the outdoor test track for the first time and felt how effortlessly it glided across the terrain, she had to bite her lip until it almost bled. Every motion was intuitive. She barely had to think. A shift in her shoulder turned the chair. A light press of her palm gave her speed. The neural assist did the rest, reading her posture and micro-adjustments to keep her balanced even over uneven concrete. There were no jolts. No jerks. No reminders that her body was working against her. The Horizon moved as if it understood her. It was freedom in alloy and code. The track itself was a small marvel, a loop built behind the main building, mimicking real-world surfaces, gravel, curb transitions, cracked sidewalk, even a short ramp to simulate steep driveways. As Grace approached the first incline, she hesitated. In her hospital-issued chair, this would have required either a helper or a prayer. Mira rolled up beside her, her own chair humming softly. "Lean forward slightly," she said, "and trust the torque sensors. It'll compensate." Grace took a breath. Shifted her weight. Pressed forward. And to her surprise, she didn't just make it up the ramp, she conquered it. Smoothly. Powerfully. No struggle. No fear. Eli watched from the sidelines, legs dangling off the bench, hands on his cheeks. When she reached the top of the ramp and looked back at him, his whole face lit up. He jumped to his feet and cheered like it was a baseball game. "Go, Mom. Go." Grace smiled so hard her cheeks hurt. She raised one fist like a victory salute and wheeled down the other side of the ramp with total control. She was doing it. She was back. Not the same, but not less. Mira clapped softly. "You're ready for Phase 2, she said. Phase 2 meant taking the chair beyond the lab. They had a test route mapped through a local park, including a short ride through city sidewalks, traffic crossings, and a brief stop at a cafe for autonomy testing, an unofficial challenge to see if the user could perform basic daily errands without assistance. Grace was nervous. The controlled track had been a comfort. The real world? That was where everything had fallen apart. Ravi handed her a headset before she left. "You'll be connected to us via audio the whole time. We'll monitor vitals, chair diagnostics, GPS. If anything goes wrong, we're 2 blocks away. But we believe you're more than capable." Grace adjusted the earpiece and nodded. Mira winked. "Let's show the world what's coming." The ride started smoothly. The sidewalk was wide and recently repaved. Cars passed without honking. Eli walked beside her, marveling at how the horizon glided silently. "You're faster than the old chair," he said, almost reverently. "You're like, stealth mode." Grace grinned. "Next time I'll sneak into your school and steal your homework." He laughed, the sound light and real. They passed a small bookstore, then a coffee shop with outside seating. A woman pushing a stroller did a double-take as Grace rolled by. But this time, it wasn't pity she saw in the woman's eyes, it was curiosity. Admiration, even. They reached the park and paused near the entrance, where a short but bumpy path led into a shaded trail surrounded by trees. Grace hesitated. This was not a path designed for wheelchairs. The ground was uneven, full of small dips and exposed roots. But Ravi's voice came gently through the headset. "If you want to skip the trail, we can reroute." "No," Grace said quickly. "I've got it." She adjusted her center of gravity, toggled the terrain setting on the left wheel control, and moved forward. The chair responded instantly, adjusting to each bump and change in grade. The tires gripped with surprising ease. The suspension system flexed to absorb the jolts. She rolled down the trail with a confidence she hadn't felt in years. Eli ran ahead, whooping like they were on an adventure. Halfway down the path, Grace rolled to a stop under a tree and looked up at the sky filtered through leaves. A breeze drifted past, carrying the faint scent of pine. For the first time in months, she didn't feel like the world was passing her by. She was in it. Present. Moving. Alive. She turned the chair slowly and returned to the main path, where they followed the map to a small cafe with outdoor seating. Mira and Ravi were already waiting in plain clothes, pretending to sip coffee and watching her like proud parents at a recital. The test here was simple: navigate the cafe, order a drink, and return without assistance. Grace approached the counter. The man behind it blinked at the horizon but didn't say anything rude. She ordered an iced tea, reached the counter with ease thanks to the adjustable seat height, and maneuvered to a table. Success. Eli sat across from her, sipping orange juice and drawing rocket ships in a notepad. "You're amazing," he said, completely serious. "You're better than Batman." Grace tilted her head. "Batman has a lot more gadgets." Eli shrugged. "Yeah, but you've got something he doesn't." "What's that?" "You're real." She couldn't speak for a moment. Her throat caught. The test ended an hour later, and the team drove them back to Tesla HQ, where Mira uploaded the chair's performance data and Ravi reviewed vitals. "Zero anomalies," he said, visibly impressed. "Your handling time was 27% faster than our average." "You're a natural," Mira added. That night, the lab held a small dinner for the testing team. Grace and Eli were the guests of honor. They sat under string lights in the courtyard with bowls of pasta and stories from the engineers who had worked behind the scenes for years, building features Grace hadn't even noticed yet. "The rear sensor," one said, "we modeled it after owl vision. It senses movement from behind and warns if someone's approaching too fast." Another added, "The solar panel charges at 22% efficiency even in cloudy weather. You can ride all day and still have battery left." Grace listened, amazed, humbled, and finally understood, this wasn't just a machine. This was a movement. A future designed for people like her. Not as an afterthought, but as a beginning. Later, when the party ended and the lights dimmed, Grace wheeled out to the far end of the courtyard alone. She looked up at the stars. Somewhere out there, people still saw her as a viral story or a charity case. But here, she was part of the mission. She whispered into the night, "Thank you. Whoever you are, wherever you are, thank you for not giving up on people like me." The chair, sensing stillness, went into standby mode with a soft chime. And Grace sat quietly in the dark, realizing she wasn't just along for the ride anymore. She was driving again. It was the middle of the night when Grace woke up in a sweat, her breath shallow, her muscles twitching involuntarily like they sometimes did when the phantom memories of the crash clawed back into her mind. The Tesla dorm room was dark and silent, but her body was screaming, pulsing with echoes of pain she couldn't locate and fear she couldn't explain. The nightmare had been the same one she'd had off and on for the past 6 months, the screeching tires, the blinding headlights, the moment of weightlessness before impact, the deafening silence after. It was always followed by the same impossible moment, her standing again, only to fall, over and over, with no one catching her. She sat up in her horizon chair, now her primary resting station at night, the reclining seat adjusted perfectly for her back and hips. She activated the low reading light and rubbed her temples. She didn't want to wake Eli. He was finally sleeping soundly in the adjacent bed, wrapped in the NASA blanket the team had given him when he'd asked too many questions about Elon Musk and Mars. Grace exhaled slowly and wheeled toward the window, staring out at the parking lot lit by automated floodlights. The quiet was deceptive. She knew the labs 2 floors below were still active, someone always stayed late. Progress never slept here. Her mind, still racing, reached into the past without permission. She thought about her parents' old house in Akron, where she had grown up scraping her knees on gravel and being told by her mother that girls should sit properly, and smile more. Her mother had never understood why Grace wanted to work in emergency medicine. Why not be a nurse, she'd asked more than once, never meaning to insult, but always betraying her narrow understanding of ambition. Grace had grown used to being underestimated. In college, in med school, even in the ER. She was a fast mover, a loud thinker, someone who didn't ask permission before taking charge. Patients trusted her. Supervisors respected her. But some colleagues bristled. "You're intense," one attending physician told her once. "Try to soften the edges." Grace remembered looking him dead in the eye and replying, "I don't have time for edges. I've got patience." That fire, that version of herself, she missed it. It had gone dim after the accident, buried under fatigue and bureaucracy and pity. But here, in this place of innovation and electric hope, it was sparking again. The Horizon chair had given her physical movement, but it was the mission, the sense of purpose, that was waking her soul. She didn't just want to test the product. She wanted to shape it. The next morning, over breakfast in the communal dining space, she approached Mira. "What happens after the testing ends?" Mira looked up from her coffee. "You go home. We continue development. And you get your own production model." "That's it?" Grace asked. "That's all." Mira raised an eyebrow. "What are you thinking?" Grace hesitated for only a second. "I want to be part of this. Not just as a tester. I have skills. A medical background. Real-world experience. And I know what it feels like to fall through the cracks." Mira smiled like she'd been waiting for that moment. "Come to the next design meeting. See if you're still interested after 6 hours of engineers arguing over joystick angles." That afternoon, Grace sat in on her first development session. She listened, observed, and then slowly started speaking up, at first with questions, then with ideas. She pointed out that most public spaces weren't designed with battery recharging in mind. She suggested better tactile buttons for people with neuropathy. She recommended a modular arm design for users with one-side weakness. To her surprise, they listened. Ravi took notes. Mira nodded. The lead engineer, a quiet woman named Jody, actually smiled and said, "We've needed someone like you." That night, something shifted. Grace looked at her own reflection in the dorm room mirror, and for the first time since the accident, she didn't flinch. She didn't look like a victim. She looked like a leader. 2 days later, her past came calling. A message from Ohio appeared in her inbox. It was from her former department head at the hospital. A short, cold message. "Saw the story. Hope you're recovering well. We filled your position. HR should have reached out to finalize paperwork." That was it. No apology. No acknowledgement of her years of service. Just bureaucracy in a bow. Grace stared at the email and felt that familiar rage rising in her throat. She didn't want her job back, but she wanted to be treated like a human being, not a spreadsheet. She almost deleted the message. But then she opened a new tab and wrote back a single line, "Thanks. I found better." She didn't send it for spite. She sent it as a declaration. She had found better. The next week was a blur of design meetings, strength tests, data collection, and user trials. Grace began mentoring other testers, most of whom had less experience advocating for themselves. She helped one woman redesign her seating posture to reduce pressure sores. She translated complex medical terminology for a paraplegic teenager who had been overwhelmed by the onboarding process. And through it all, she kept journaling, documenting the experience not just as a subject, but as a future ambassador. Ravi noticed. "You should speak at the launch event," he said one afternoon, scribbling notes on his tablet. "You have the story people need to hear." Grace blinked. "Launch event?" "September," he said. "We're going public. Global rollout. Press. Investors. First 2,000 chairs go to verified need-based applicants. We want you to headline it." Grace wasn't sure what shocked her more, that the product was that close to release or that they wanted her, a formerly anonymous single mom from Ohio, to speak on its behalf. "I'm not a celebrity," she said. "You're something better," Mira chimed in. "You're proof." Eli overheard the conversation and ran to his room to grab the drawing he'd made their first week in California, Grace flying in the Horizon chair over a city skyline, lightning bolts behind her. "You're already famous to me," he said. Grace hugged him tightly and looked over his shoulder at the future unfolding. She had arrived as a desperate woman clinging to hope. But she was becoming something else entirely. Not just a user. Not just a story. She was becoming the voice of a movement. And the world wasn't ready for what she was about to say. The auditorium was electric with anticipation. It wasn't just the media lighting, or the giant Tesla mobility banners flanking the stage, or the whisper of high-profile journalists in the first 3 rows, it was something deeper, something more human. It was the kind of silence that existed right before a life changed. Grace sat just off stage, hands folded over her lap, the horizon glinting under soft LEDs, her heart thudding loud enough that she could feel it in her neck. Ravi gave her a small nod from backstage while Mira adjusted her microphone and handed her a small clicker for the slideshow. "You don't have to prove anything," Mira said softly. "Just tell your truth." But Grace knew this wasn't just about truth. It was about being heard. About breaking the silence that had followed her ever since the day she couldn't walk anymore. The day the world had decided she was less. The room went dark. The Tesla logo pulsed on the screen. Then came the soft swell of music. Low strings, a rising piano chord, and a video began to play. It showed wheelchair users across the world, a woman in India navigating potholes, a boy in Brazil being carried upstairs, a veteran in Detroit struggling to enter a public bus. And then it cut to Grace, her first test ride on the horizon, the look on her face as she soared down the sidewalk in California sunlight. The crowd watched, silent. The music faded. And the lights came up. Grace rolled onto the stage. The applause was immediate, loud, but not wild. Respectful. Intense. Like the sound of thousands of people deciding to listen. She stopped center stage, looked out at the room, and began. "What if you lost everything in a single moment?" Her voice was clear. Controlled. What if the body you trusted stopped working, the job you loved vanished, and you were left with nothing but a child and a broken wheelchair? The room was dead still. She continued. "I was a trauma nurse. I spent my life helping people survive the worst days of theirs. But when my worst day came, when I woke up paralyzed after a car accident, there was no one left. My job was gone. My benefits disappeared in the fine print. And I found myself staring down an eviction notice with no backup plan. I was surviving, not living. I was invisible. Until someone at Tesla read my letter." She clicked the remote. A photo of the horizon appeared on screen. "This chair is more than technology. It's a key. A key to mobility, dignity, independence. For me. For millions like me. This isn't about luxury. It's about equity. It's about what happens when we design for people, not pity." She paused, letting the words sink in. "People say innovation is about the future. But I think it's about bringing people back to life. The Horizon chair didn't just give me movement, it gave me my voice back. And today, I'm using that voice to say, we deserve more. We deserve mobility that doesn't bankrupt us. We deserve tech that sees us not as data points, but as humans." There was movement in the crowd now, people nodding, wiping eyes. Some reporters stopped typing. They were just listening. "When this chair launches," she continued, "it won't just ship to celebrities or influencers. It'll ship to people on waiting lists. To veterans. To moms. To kids. To anyone who needs it. For under $200. And not because it's cheap, but because it's right." Another click. A slide with the price point. $199. Murmurs in the audience. Shock. Awe. Grace leaned forward slightly. "If we can build rockets that land themselves, we can build a wheelchair that doesn't bankrupt a family." The applause began then, not polite, but powerful. Real. A roar of approval. She looked down at Eli in the front row, who clapped with both hands above his head, beaming with a pride that made her throat close up. Her voice softened. This story started with a fall. But it ends in flight. She rolled back, the spotlight dimming, the audience on their feet. The moment landed harder than she expected. Afterward, reporters rushed in, microphones, cameras, lights. Everyone wanted a quote. An angle. She answered a few questions, then excused herself and rolled into a quiet corner backstage, heart still pounding. Mira found her there minutes later. "You crushed it," she said. Grace just nodded, exhausted but glowing. "I never thought I'd speak to thousands of people in a chair," she said. Mira tilted her head. "You didn't just speak. You shook the room." That night, her inbox exploded. So did her messages. Strangers reached out from all over the world, Germany, Kenya, Kansas, Seoul. Some shared stories of disability. Others simply said thank you. A mother in Minnesota wrote, "My daughter was diagnosed with a degenerative condition last year. She saw your video. She believes she can have a future again." That one made Grace cry. She sat alone in her dorm room, horizon beside her, and let the tears fall. Not from grief this time. From purpose. The next week, Grace was invited to speak at a disability advocacy panel in D.C., then at a Mobility Innovation Summit in Austin. Her video went viral, over 12 million views in 5 days. People began to associate her not just with the chair, but with the movement itself. And yet, amid the press, the tech features, the opportunities, Grace kept returning to a single question: how could she make sure this wasn't a moment, but a shift? She approached Ravi and Mira with a proposal. "We need a user advisory board," she said. "One made up of real people. Not just engineers. Not just testers. Long-term users. Global voices. Diverse needs." Ravi blinked. "We've talked about that. But it always felt hard to coordinate." "It'll be harder not to," Grace said. "We can't lead a movement if we're not listening." Mira nodded. "You want to run it?" "I need to," Grace said. "For the people like me who didn't get a second chance. Let's make this one count." The board launched 2 months later. Grace chaired the first meeting. Members joined via video from 7 countries. She listened, took notes, proposed features, defended new upgrades, and challenged weak ones. She reminded the team that no matter how sleek the tech, it had to serve the user. She became the voice of accountability, and the soul of the mission. Back in Ohio, her old apartment had been leased to someone else. But that was fine. Tesla offered her a long-term housing option in California, near the Mobility Center, with access to schools for Eli and part-time consulting pay. She accepted. Not because she needed a handout, but because she'd earned her seat at the table. One afternoon, while organizing her desk, she came across the eviction notice she'd saved as a reminder. She stared at it, remembered the fear, the shame. And then she shredded it. Not because she wanted to forget, but because she no longer needed it to remember how far she'd come. That evening, she sat in the garden with Eli. He was sketching again. This time it was a new kind of wheelchair with wings. "Think we'll fly someday?" he asked. "Maybe," she said. "But even if we don't, we're already soaring." The horizon hummed softly beneath her. Not just a machine. A movement. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? The factory smelled like metal, heat, and ambition. Massive robotic arms danced overhead like mechanical ballet dancers, welding sparks showering in precise bursts, conveyor belts humming with the rhythm of productivity. Grace rolled beside Ravi through the main assembly floor of Tesla's Fremont facility, eyes wide, heart pounding, not from nerves, but from awe. It was one thing to imagine the Horizon chair being produced. It was another to see it happen in real time, thousands of parts converging into a machine that could change lives. Ravi pointed to a station where dozens of aluminum chassis were lined up, each one being inspected by a technician with a handheld scanner. "This is where the frame gets its identity," he said. "Every chair has a unique digital tag tied to the user, so if there's ever an issue, we can trace it." Grace nodded slowly, absorbing the level of thought that had gone into every detail. Near the back of the line, a younger technician was testing an armrest module, running his fingers along the grip sensor that detected muscular tremors. He glanced up and did a double take when he saw Grace. "Wait, are you?" She smiled. "Yeah. I'm one of the test riders." His face lit up like a kid meeting a superhero. "You changed everything for us. Everyone here watches that launch video." Grace wasn't used to being recognized by engineers. Doctors, sure. Nurses, yes. But assembly workers? Robotics teams? That was new. And deeply humbling. Ravi leaned in. "You have more fans here than Elon." They continued on, past rows of battery modules and power units, until they reached the acoustic booth where the final calibration happened. Grace watched a woman in a hijab adjust the pitch modulation on the auditory sensors. These were subtle alerts, small clicks or tones the chair emitted to communicate battery status or environmental changes. "We have users who are blind, too," Ravi said. "Every sense matters." Grace rolled closer and asked, "Can you make the low battery sound something less stressful than a buzz? Like a chime?" The woman grinned. "Already working on it." Grace nodded, impressed again. These people didn't just build chairs. They built trust. Back upstairs, Mira met them in the conference room with a stack of proposals and a look that said today would be long. "We've got 10 new mods to approve before the next production cycle," she said. "We're ahead of schedule, but feedback from the early adopters is flooding in." Grace scanned the notes: requests for weatherproof footrests, foldable trays, side mirrors for street travel. One suggestion, scribbled hastily, simply said, "Please add more colors. Gray is depressing." That made her laugh. "They're not wrong," she said. "Why should mobility feel medical?" Mira raised an eyebrow. "Want to design the first Horizon color collection?" "Yes," Grace said instantly. "Let's start with Sunset Copper." Ravi chuckled. "You've gone full brand ambassador now." But it wasn't about branding. It was about soul. Steel and software could move a chair. But it was the small things, color, feel, personalization, that made it someone's own. She thought of the first time she tried to decorate her hospital-issued chair. She'd taped little stars to the side, just for Eli. A nurse had removed them, saying it made the chair look less professional. That memory still stung. "Dignity doesn't come in grayscale," Grace said quietly. "Let's paint with purpose." Over the next few weeks, Grace worked with the design team to build a personalization suite. Users could choose from a dozen color palettes, add custom textures, even select the voice of their AI assistant. She insisted the voices be gender-neutral and culturally diverse. "I don't want everyone hearing the same robotic tone," she said. "Make it human." They named the update Soulware. Internally, the factory team began calling her Captain Grace. She tried to laugh it off, but secretly, she liked it. It made her feel whole again. Like she was leading something that mattered. One afternoon, she received a message from a rehab center in Atlanta. A teenage girl named Lila had been one of the first non-beta Horizon recipients. She'd lost both legs in a car crash. Her mother had submitted an application through the need-based program. The message included a video. Grace clicked. It opened to Lila wheeling herself down a basketball court, her Horizon gliding with smooth precision as she passed a ball to another player. Lila turned to the camera and said, "Before this chair, I never thought I'd play again. Now I'm dreaming about tryouts." Then her voice softened. Thanks, Grace. I hope I get to meet you one day. Grace sat motionless for a long time, blinking at the screen. Then she stood, or rather, activated the horizon's vertical lift, raising her body upright. And whispered, "We're just getting started." The next day, she pitched a bold idea, a road tour. "Let's take the horizon to the people," she said. "Live demos. Real users. Schools, parks, city halls. Not just media events. I want conversations." Ravi tilted his head. "You want to travel across the country? With what, an RV full of tech?" "Exactly," Grace said. "We'll call it the Drive Forward Tour." Mira was already smiling. "I'll get the logistics team." That summer, the tour began. Grace and Eli, along with a small Tesla crew, loaded up a customized electric trailer with Horizon units and hit the road. They visited 21 cities in 30 days. From Phoenix to Pittsburgh, from rural Georgia to downtown Chicago. At each stop, people gathered, not just disabled folks, but their families, friends, caregivers, skeptics, and believers. Grace spoke, listened, cried, laughed. She taught a man with late-stage MS how to use his head movements to steer. She helped a girl with cerebral palsy customize her voice settings. She hugged a Vietnam vet who said, "This is the first chair that feels like me." News outlets picked up the story. The hashtag #DriveForward trended for days. Grace wasn't just the face of the campaign, she was its fire. And Eli? He became the unofficial mascot. He drew cartoons of every city they visited, signed autographs for little kids, and told anyone who'd listen, "My mom's a superhero. Her power is wheels." Near the end of the tour, in a quiet moment by a lake in Minnesota, Grace asked him, "You okay with all this? Being on the road?" He looked up from his sketchpad. "Mom, I've never seen you this happy. I don't care where we are, as long as we're together." That night, she cried again, but for joy. Real, raw, steady joy. When the tour ended, she returned to Fremont with a new vision. "This can't end here," she told the team. "We need to build community. Support. Long-term care." Mira nodded. "You're thinking bigger than mobility." "I'm thinking humanity," Grace said. And so began the next chapter, one that didn't start with wheels or wires, but with soul. The morning after Grace returned from the Drive Forward tour, Fremont felt like a different city. The factory was the same, the lab still humming with genius, but there was a new energy now, something bigger than the product itself. The horizon was no longer a prototype, no longer a whisper of innovation. It was real, out in the world, changing lives. The tour had lit a fuse, and now that fire was spreading. Demand was flooding in, emails, letters, videos, phone calls from families, schools, rehab centers, even foreign governments. Everyone wanted in. Everyone wanted access to the $199 miracle machine that was shattering the assumptions of disability, design, and affordability. But with demand came pressure. Grace stood in the central boardroom alongside Mira and Ravi as a panel of Tesla mobility strategists laid out the reality. "We have applications exceeding capacity by 400%, one executive said. "We can't manufacture fast enough to meet global demand within our current supply chain." Another added, "Shipping to Africa and Southeast Asia is going to require major partnerships. We'll need NGOs, humanitarian groups, customs exemptions. It's complex." Grace listened carefully, nodding. She wasn't naive. She knew mass adoption wasn't as simple as flipping a switch. But she also wasn't afraid. She had survived worse than bureaucracy. She cleared her throat and spoke calmly. "We have an opportunity to rewrite what mobility looks like on a global scale. Let's not pull back just because it's hard. Let's build smarter." Mira leaned in. "Grace, tell them your vision." Grace didn't hesitate. We don't just need a product pipeline, we need a global support ecosystem. Local training hubs. Peer-led guidance. Micro-distribution centers. Horizon shouldn't just be something we ship. It should be something we teach. Ravi added, and the advisory board she built is already in motion. We can lean into that network. One executive looked skeptical. That's great for passion projects. But what about margins? We can't run this like a non-profit. Grace locked eyes with him. We're not. We're running it like a revolution. And no revolution starts with spreadsheets. Silence followed. Then Mira, ever diplomatic, stepped in. We'll find balance. But we can't lead a future we don't believe in. And right now? The world believes in this. In the weeks that followed, Grace worked side by side with teams across disciplines. She wasn't just consulting anymore, she was building. They launched Horizon Community Hubs, pilot programs in 5 cities designed to serve as resource centers for Horizon users. Each hub was staffed with both clinicians and peer mentors, people who understood the real challenges of navigating the world in a chair. There were workshops, maintenance stations, adaptive sports tryouts, and even mental health counseling. The first hub opened in Detroit, in a refurbished YMCA that Tesla retrofitted with solar panels and smart tech. Grace flew out for the ribbon cutting, only to find the sidewalk packed with locals, hundreds of people cheering, some in chairs, some not, all united by one thing, hope. A local news anchor interviewed Grace on site. "What's your biggest goal with this program?" she asked. Grace looked into the camera and spoke with quiet fire. "I want every person who's ever felt stuck, unseen, or discarded to know that they matter. Not someday. Today. Right now. And this chair. It's just the beginning." That clip would be shared over 30 million times. Meanwhile, Horizon chairs began to show up in places no one expected. A boy in South Korea used his chair to enter a science fair. A grandmother in Peru rolled into her first ever church service without being carried. A war survivor in Ukraine posted a video gliding through a damaged but recovering neighborhood, saying, "This is the first time I've felt free since the bombs fell." Grace created a team to track these stories, collect them, amplify them. They called it Horizon Voices. It became a heartbeat of the movement, a digital archive of resilience. And everywhere she went, people stopped calling her a spokesperson. Now they called her a founder. A changemaker. But not everyone celebrated. Opposition was growing, too. Some traditional wheelchair manufacturers began lobbying regulators to investigate the Horizon's pricing, claiming it was unfair competition. Online forums debated whether the chair could really be made ethically for under $200. Others said it was too advanced for the average user. Grace heard it all, read the critiques, and kept going. One night, she posted a video directly addressing the controversy. Sitting in her Horizon, face lit only by a desk lamp, she spoke into her phone camera with measured honesty. "To anyone saying this is too good to be true, I get it. I would have said the same thing a year ago. But progress isn't a scam. Sometimes it's just overdue. And we're not here to destroy anyone, we're here to raise the bar. If that makes people uncomfortable, good. It should." The video went viral, again. But more importantly, it shut down the doubters. Grace wasn't just defending a product. She was defending a future. Tesla mobility continued to grow. A second production facility broke ground in Texas. Elon Musk himself tweeted about Grace's work, calling her an example of what happens when empathy meets engineering. Grace rolled her eyes at the flattery, but she appreciated the amplification. Still, she never lost focus. She still led advisory meetings. Still reviewed hardware tweaks. Still took calls from users who just needed someone to listen. One call, from a man in West Virginia, stuck with her. "My name's Henry," he said. I've been in chairs since Vietnam. I thought I'd seen everything. But I tried your chair today and I cried. Not from pain. From remembering what it felt like to move without fear. That line haunted her, in the best way. To move without fear. That was the dream. Not just for mobility, but for life. Grace began working with Tesla's AI division to improve Horizon's smart features. They developed terrain recognition, adaptive route mapping, and even predictive safety alerts. Grace tested them all herself, rolling through downtown streets, parks, alleys. She logged notes obsessively. She wanted it perfect. Not for herself anymore, but for the next person who would need it. One night, after a late test session, she and Eli sat on the hood of Myra's electric van, looking at the stars. "You ever wonder what would have happened if the accident never happened?" he asked. Grace took a breath. "All the time. Would you still be a nurse?" "Maybe. Probably. But I wouldn't be here. I wouldn't know all these people. I wouldn't have helped make something this big." Eli nodded. "I like this version of you. Even if it took a hard road to get here." She looked at him, overwhelmed by the love in his voice. "Me too, buddy. Me too." The wind rustled the trees. Somewhere behind them, a Horizon chair hummed to sleep mode. And Grace knew this wasn't the climax of the story. It was the ignition. A movement had begun. And it was unstoppable now. Grace had expected pushback from the outside world, competitors, skeptics, regulators, but she hadn't prepared herself for the friction coming from within. It started subtly, in quiet meetings where decisions were delayed, emails left unanswered, and proposals that once flew through with unanimous support now seemed to hang in limbo. At first, she chalked it up to growth pains. Tesla Mobility was scaling rapidly, new teams, new hires, new executives brought in from traditional tech companies. But soon, the shift became more pronounced. A long-anticipated software update that would have added enhanced speech command features for users with limited hand mobility was abruptly deprioritized. The reason? Not enough demand to justify resource allocation. Grace was livid. Not enough demand. You have 2,500 emails from users with ALS and MS asking for exactly this. But the new director of product, a polished Silicon Valley veteran named Nolan Pierce, was unmoved. "We've got to think big picture," he said coolly. "We're entering international markets, and we need to focus on features that scale broadly. This one's niche." Grace stared at him. Niche is where innovation starts. If you ignore edge cases, you're designing for no one. "We're designing for profitability," he replied. "Empathy doesn't keep the lights on." That phrase stuck in her head like a splinter. Empathy doesn't keep the lights on. The next few weeks were tense. Nolan began making decisions without consulting the advisory board. Community feedback loops were quietly deprioritized. The vibrant, messy, human-centered development cycle Grace had helped shape was being replaced with sleek roadmaps and quarterly metrics. One morning, she discovered that Horizon's latest model, version 2.3, had shipped without the customizable voice module she'd spent months helping design. Instead, every unit had the same default robotic tone. She stormed into Myra's office, holding the test unit in her lap. "We agreed this would be humanized. What happened?" Myra looked exhausted. "I fought it, Grace. But Nolan pushed hard. Said we'd launch voice options later, once the market stabilized." Grace narrowed her eyes. "People aren't markets. They're people." Myra sighed. "I know. But I can't fight every battle alone." Grace leaned forward. "Then don't. I'll fight with you." That afternoon, Grace called an emergency meeting of the advisory board. Representatives from the pilot cities joined via video. A young coder from Chicago, a retired nurse from Houston, a disability activist from Nairobi. One by one, they shared stories of New Horizon users confused, disappointed, or alienated by the sudden shift in design tone. "It's subtle," said the activist, "but it matters. It feels like they've started designing around us instead of with us." Grace knew they were right. And she knew what had to be done. She drafted a formal report, 12 pages of data, testimonials, user surveys, and breakdowns of lost value from the voice rollback. She ended it with a quote from one user who wrote, "If I wanted to feel like a machine, I wouldn't have applied for Horizon. I applied because it made me feel like a person again." She handed it directly to Nolan. He skimmed the first few pages and said, "Appreciate your passion, Grace. But we're running a company here, not a charity." That was the breaking point. Grace stood up. "Then you've forgotten what we're doing here. This chair isn't about margins, it's about momentum. It's about movement, literal and figurative. And if you can't see that, you're not the future of this mission. You're the obstacle." The silence that followed was thick. Nolan didn't respond. But she could see it in his face, he wasn't going to back down. So she made a decision. She called Mira that night. "I want to take this public," she said. "Not with drama. With truth. The people who supported us deserve to know where this is going." Mira hesitated. "You're sure?" "This mission started with a story," Grace said. "Maybe it needs another." Within 48 hours, she posted a video update through the Horizon Voices platform. This time, there was no music. No production. Just Grace, sitting in her chair, hands folded, eyes direct. "Hi. It's Grace. Some of you know me from the beginning of this journey. Some of you just joined. But I want to talk to all of you. Because Horizon belongs to all of us. Lately, I've seen changes that don't sit right with me, choices that move us away from the heart of what we built together. I believe in this chair. I believe in this movement. But I also believe in transparency. If we let profit erase purpose, we lose everything that made this revolutionary. So I'm asking you, keep speaking. Keep sending your stories. Keep holding us accountable. I promise I will, too." The response was immediate and thunderous. Tens of thousands of comments poured in. Hashtags like #HorizonForHumans and #KeepGraceLeading exploded across social media. More importantly, emails began arriving at Tesla Mobility headquarters, from users, influencers, veterans, disability advocates, even investors, demanding clarity and reaffirmation of the original mission. Within a week, Elon himself requested a private call with Grace. He joined via satellite link, his voice clear but clipped. "I've been watching. The Horizon chair is becoming more than a product, it's a symbol. That's powerful. But it's also dangerous if mishandled." Grace didn't flinch. "Then put it back in the hands of the people who built it. Let us lead." There was a long pause. Then Elon said, "I want Nolan reassigned. You and Mira, take over full development and community operations. Direct line to me. No more layers." Grace blinked. "Are you serious?" "Completely. You built this momentum. Keep it alive." The following week, Tesla Mobility announced Grace as the new Chief Director of User-Centered Innovation. Nolan was quietly moved to another division. Mira became head of global development. The voice module was reinstated. Customization returned. The Soulware interface went live in every major language. Grace didn't celebrate with champagne or speeches. She celebrated by visiting a rehab center in Oakland, personally helping 3 new users unbox their Horizon chairs and roll for the first time. One of them, a woman named Maria who had lost her legs to sepsis, cried the moment she took her first solo ride. "I feel like I'm here again," she whispered. That night, Grace watched the sun dip below the skyline from the balcony of her new office. Eli sat beside her, drawing again, this time, a comic about a robot that listens to humans, not the other way around. She looked at him, then down at the horizon beneath her. It had started as metal and code. Now it was soul and story. But she knew the fight wasn't over. Because innovation wasn't a finish line. It was a promise. The first Horizon shipment to Uganda arrived in the middle of the rainy season. Grace watched the footage on her tablet in silence, men and women unloading pallets from the back of a rugged electric Tesla delivery truck, wading through red mud with sleeves rolled up and grins wide. There were children watching from the side of the road, barefoot, eyes wide as boxes were unpacked and the chairs inside took shape. The local clinic director, a woman named Dr. Apio, sent Grace a voice note that evening. "We've waited years for something like this. These aren't just wheelchairs. They're dignity machines." Grace replayed that phrase over and over. Dignity machines. That's exactly what the Horizon had become. It wasn't just about movement, it was about possibility. About showing people that their worth didn't vanish when their bodies changed. That evening, Grace sat in a strategy meeting with Mira and a team of global outreach partners. They were scaling fast now, expanding to more than 40 countries in under 9 months. Each region presented its own challenges: terrain, infrastructure, political red tape. But the demand was universal. The map on the screen behind them glowed with dots, places where Horizon chairs had landed, places still waiting, and places too remote to reach with traditional supply chains. "We need microfactories," Grace said. "Local hubs that can 3D print components, assemble chairs on site, and train locals. Otherwise we're going to bottleneck." Mira nodded. "We've already begun prototyping too in rural India and Brazil. Early data looks promising. We could cut delivery time by 80%. And create jobs," Grace added. "Let people build their own future, literally." She was no longer just a consultant or a symbol. She was now leading one of the most ambitious social technology campaigns in history. Tesla backed her fully, but the direction came from her desk. From lived experience, from hours spent listening to users, from a deep belief that access was a right, not a luxury. She traveled constantly now. Nairobi, Mumbai, Jakarta, Lima. In each city, she met Horizon users, many of whom had never imagined owning a mobility device, let alone one with adaptive AI, real-time health monitoring, and voice personalization. In Indonesia, she met a fisherman named Setio who'd lost both legs in a boating accident and used his Horizon chair to return to the docks for the first time in years. "They thought I was done," he told her, tearing up. "But I'm back. My sons walk beside me again." In Jordan, she rode alongside a young refugee named Amal who'd spent her childhood in a camp, always pushed, never independent. Now she zipped through the dusty streets like she owned the world. "This is my spaceship," Amal said. Grace smiled. "Then fly." Each story fueled her. But each region also revealed gaps. Charging access. Terrain durability. Local repair knowledge. So she commissioned the Global User Feedback Initiative, monthly reporting networks in every country where Horizon was active. These were led not by executives, but by users themselves. For every shipment, Tesla Mobility included a tablet loaded with Horizon's offline help guides, instructional videos in regional dialects, and a feedback loop that used low-data text relays to send usage reports and requests back to Fremont. It was a decentralized design revolution, grassroots development informed not by spreadsheets but by lived human experience. Still, not everyone celebrated. Some governments stalled Horizon distribution with bureaucratic delays. In one country, black market resellers began marking up the $199 chair for more than 10 times its value, exploiting desperation. Grace responded by launching a "Mobility Belongs to Everyone" campaign, free local seminars, encrypted tracking IDs, and a global network of certified Horizon allies trained to vet and verify ethical distribution. They also implemented a give-back program, where users who outgrew or no longer needed their chairs could return them for refurbishment and redistribution. But the biggest transformation was cultural. Slowly, invisibly, perceptions of disability were beginning to shift. In places where wheelchairs had once been hidden or stigmatized, Horizon users became respected. Some were hired as Horizon ambassadors. Others created art, music, or businesses with their newfound independence. Grace visited a Horizon community market in Accra where local vendors, all wheelchair users, sold handcrafted goods from stalls redesigned for accessibility. One man told her, "I went from beggar to businessman in 6 weeks." In the Philippines, a Horizon-based dance troupe formed, posting videos that went viral worldwide. In South Africa, a school installed its first accessible library because the Horizon rollout had inspired a teacher to demand equal space for all. Each ripple added up. And the media began to notice. Time magazine named Grace one of its most influential leaders of the year. National Geographic did a photo spread of Horizon users on every continent. Wired called the chair the most democratic machine since the bicycle. Grace was invited to speak at the United Nations. Standing before delegates in a simple black dress and her copper-colored Horizon, she told them, "Mobility is more than physical. It's psychological. It's societal. When you give people the ability to move freely, you're not just changing their trajectory. You're changing the world's." Thunderous applause followed. After the event, an ambassador from a small island nation approached her privately. "We have fewer than 100 Horizon units," he said. "But they've transformed how we see disability. They've transformed how we govern." Grace shook his hand, blinking back tears. "That's why we're here." Back in California, Tesla mobility was changing too. The new leadership team, most of whom had started on Grace's advisory board, were building a culture rooted in inclusion. Hiring practices shifted. Accessibility wasn't just a department, it was a core metric. Employee resource groups flourished. Internships were created for disabled engineers and designers. Eli visited the Fremont campus one afternoon for a school project. Walking beside Grace, he watched workers in chairs assembling chairs, watched signs in Braille next to digital interfaces, watched a design team led by a blind coder using audio feedback tools. "This is like another planet," he said. "It's like everyone matters here." "They do," Grace replied. That evening, she received a message from Lila, the teenage basketball player she'd met virtually after the first Horizon launch. Now 17, Lila had been accepted to a college with a full scholarship and wanted to study mechanical engineering. She was building a prototype for an adaptive wheelchair-accessible mountain bike and asked if Grace would mentor her. Grace replied instantly. "Absolutely. Let's build it together." Later that night, sitting by the window with her laptop and a mug of chamomile tea, Grace finally exhaled. She thought back to the early days, the crash, the silence, the fear. The loneliness. And how one idea, born from desperation, had ignited a chain reaction across the globe. But she also knew they weren't done. There were still countries unreachable. There were still users isolated by culture, stigma, or war. There were still borders, geographic, economic, psychological. But borders could be broken. She opened a blank document and began outlining Horizon's next phase: autonomous terrain adaptation, solar charging hubs for rural areas, and multilingual offline onboarding kits. Then she titled it, simply, "No Borders. No Limits." She smiled. Somewhere out there, a person was about to sit in a Horizon for the very first time. Someone who thought they'd been forgotten. Someone about to be reminded, you matter. You're not alone. And you're going places. It started with a glitch. Not major. Not catastrophic. Just a slight lag in the auto balance feature on a Horizon unit used by a veteran in Colorado. He hit a sidewalk incline, and instead of smoothly compensating, the chair hesitated. He didn't fall. No injuries. But the moment was recorded on a nearby storefront camera and posted online by a passerby. Within hours, it had 500,000 views and a caption that read, "Tesla chair fail." By the end of the day, 3 more incidents were reported, none serious, all involving terrain calibration. Grace was in Mexico City at the time, speaking at a regional Horizon summit. Mira called her late that night. "There's a bug in the version 2.3 firmware. Auto balance is misreading incline data under specific conditions, wet pavement, fast turning, certain edge angles. It's rare, but it's real." Grace sat upright in bed, the thin hotel sheets crumpled around her legs. "How widespread?" "About 7,000 units. All from a batch distributed in North America last month." "And the press?" Mira sighed. "Picking it up fast. And some of the old resistance is coming back, talking points about overpromised safety, overhyped AI, rushed production." Grace knew what that meant. The same traditional mobility lobbyists who had gone quiet during Horizon's meteoric rise were now poking their heads back out, smelling blood in the water. She flew back to Fremont the next morning. By then, 3 news networks were covering the glitch as breaking news. Terms like tech safety crisis and unregulated rollout flashed across screens. A talking head on one channel sneered, "You get what you pay for. $200 miracles aren't real." Grace stepped off the elevator and walked directly into Tesla Mobility's crisis room, where engineers, legal advisors, and the comms team were already huddled. Ravi stood up when he saw her. "We've confirmed the issue. It's a firmware conflict with a sensor calibration update pushed last week. It only affects chairs on uneven surfaces during sudden directional shifts. How fast can we fix it?" "Patch is ready," he said. "Testing it now. But we'll need to push a mandatory update. That means communicating with thousands of users immediately. Then we do it." Grace turned to the legal team. "Any risk of lawsuits?" "Unlikely, so far," the lead counsel said. "But we recommend a proactive recall notice, even if it's software-based, it demonstrates responsibility." "Done." She turned to Mira. "Public statement in 2 hours. I'll do it myself." That afternoon, Grace sat in front of a plain backdrop, no logos, no filters. Her voice was calm but firm. "Hi. This is Grace from the Horizon team. We've identified a glitch in a recent software update that affects auto balance on a limited number of chairs. If you received a Horizon in the past 6 weeks, you'll receive a mandatory update in the next 24 hours. We are prioritizing safety. We are owning our mistakes. And we are grateful for your trust. Horizon was built to move people forward, and that includes listening when we stumble." The tea dress and her copper-colored Horizon, she told them, mobility is more than physical. It's psychological. It's societal. When you give people the ability to move freely, you're not just changing their trajectory. You're changing the world's. Thunderous applause followed. After the event, an ambassador from a small island nation approached her privately. "We have fewer than 100 Horizon units," he said. "But they've transformed how we see disability. They've transformed how we govern." Grace shook his hand, blinking back tears. "That's why we're here." Back in California, Tesla Mobility was changing too. The new leadership team, most of whom had started on Grace's advisory board, were building a culture rooted in inclusion. Hiring practices shifted. Accessibility wasn't just a department, it was a core metric. Employee resource groups flourished. Internships were created for disabled engineers and designers. Eli visited the Fremont campus one afternoon for a school project. Walking beside Grace, he watched workers in chairs assembling chairs, watched signs in Braille next to digital interfaces, watched a design team led by a blind coder using audio feedback tools. "This is like another planet," he said. "It's like everyone matters here. They do," Grace replied. That evening, she received a message from Lila, the teenage basketball player she'd met virtually after the first Horizon launch. Now 17, Lila had been accepted to a college with a full scholarship and wanted to study mechanical engineering. She was building a prototype for an adaptive wheelchair-accessible mountain bike and asked if Grace would mentor her. Grace replied instantly. Absolutely. Let's build it together. Later that night, sitting by the window with her laptop and a mug of chamomile tea, Grace finally exhaled. She thought back to the early days, the crash, the silence, the fear. The loneliness. And how one idea, born from desperation, had ignited a chain reaction across the globe. But she also knew they weren't done. There were still countries unreachable. There were still users isolated by culture, stigma, or war. There were still borders, geographic, economic, psychological. But borders could be broken. She opened a blank document and began outlining Horizon's next phase: autonomous terrain adaptation, solar charging hubs for rural areas, and multilingual offline onboarding kits. Then she titled it, simply, No Borders. No Limits. She smiled. Somewhere out there, a person was about to sit in a Horizon for the very first time. Someone who thought they'd been forgotten. Someone about to be reminded, you matter. You're not alone. And you're going places. It started with a glitch. Not major. Not catastrophic. Just a slight lag in the auto-balance feature on a Horizon unit used by a veteran in Colorado. He hit a sidewalk incline, and instead of smoothly compensating, the chair hesitated. He didn't fall. No injuries. But the moment was recorded on a nearby storefront camera and posted online by a passerby. Within hours, it had 500,000 views and a caption that read, Tesla chair fail. By the end of the day, 3 more incidents were reported, none serious, all involving terrain calibration. Grace was in Mexico City at the time, speaking at a regional Horizon summit. Mira called her late that night. There's a bug in the version 2.3 firmware. Auto-balance is misreading incline data under specific conditions, wet pavement, fast turning, certain edge angles. It's rare, but it's real. Grace sat upright in bed, the thin hotel sheets crumpled around her legs. How widespread? About 7,000 units. All from a batch distributed in North America last month. And the press? Mira sighed. Picking it up fast. And some of the old resistance is coming back, talking points about overpromised safety, overhyped AI, rushed production. Grace knew what that meant. The same traditional mobility lobbyists who had gone quiet during Horizon's meteoric rise were now poking their heads back out, smelling blood in the water. She flew back to Fremont the next morning. By then, 3 news networks were covering the glitch as breaking news. Terms like tech safety crisis and unregulated rollout flashed across screens. A talking head on one channel sneered, you get what you pay for. $200 miracles aren't real. Grace stepped off the elevator and walked directly into Tesla Mobility's crisis room, where engineers, legal advisors, and the comms team were already huddled. Ravi stood up when he saw her. We've confirmed the issue. It's a firmware conflict with a sensor calibration update pushed last week. It only affects chairs on uneven surfaces during sudden directional shifts. How fast can we fix it? Patch is ready, he said. Testing it now. But we'll need to push a mandatory update. That means communicating with thousands of users immediately. Then we do it. Grace turned to the legal team. Any risk of lawsuits? Unlikely, so far, the lead counsel said. But we recommend a proactive recall notice, even if it's software-based, it demonstrates responsibility. Done. She turned to Mira. Public statement in 2 hours. I'll do it myself. That afternoon, Grace sat in front of a plain backdrop, no logos, no filters. Her voice was calm but firm. "Hi. This is Grace from the Horizon team. We've identified a glitch in a recent software update that affects auto-balance on a limited number of chairs. If you received a Horizon in the past 6 weeks, you'll receive a mandatory update in the next 24 hours. We are prioritizing safety. We are owning our mistakes. And we are grateful for your trust. Horizon was built to move people forward, and that includes listening when we stumble." The transparency worked. Most of the community responded with understanding. Still, critics pounced. A conservative news outlet ran a headline, "Elon's wheelchair empire, too fast, too cheap, too risky." Lobbyists for 2 major wheelchair manufacturers filed requests with the FDA for a full investigation into Horizon's design and approval process. A trade association began running anti-Horizon ads in print and online, using fear-based language and images of broken chairs, even though none of those images were real. Grace met with the Tesla legal and policy teams. "They're not just reacting," she said. "They're launching a coordinated campaign to kill Horizon's credibility. We're already seeing Hill movement," one policy lead confirmed. A small group of senators want hearings on disruptive medical mobility technology. "We disrupted the market," Mira said. "Now it's punching back." The backlash wasn't just political. Some rehab centers, once eager partners, now paused their Horizon rollout. Insurance companies began to slow reimbursement claims. Social media bots spread false rumors about chair explosions and AI crashes. Grace didn't sleep much that week. Instead, she visited users affected by the glitch, personally testing each update, riding alongside them to confirm it worked. She called every partner clinic herself. She organized a roundtable with critics. But she also knew it wasn't enough. This wasn't just a tech bug, it was a perception war. So she shifted strategy. She created the Horizon Accountability Council, an independent, third-party watchdog group composed of engineers, ethicists, clinicians, and, most importantly, users. Their job? Auditing Horizon's safety protocols, transparency processes, and development timelines. Their reports would be public, raw, and uncensored. "You want proof we're not hiding anything," she said during the launch. "Here. Look over our shoulder." Within days, the Accountability Council released its first report. It confirmed the bug, praised the speed of the response, and recommended deeper stress testing on future updates. It ended with a line that said, "The Horizon chair remains the safest and most cost-effective mobility solution in modern production." The tide began to turn again. But Grace wasn't interested in just weathering the storm. She wanted to understand it. She called a private meeting with the CEOs of 3 legacy mobility companies. 2 refused. 1 agreed. They met in a quiet office in Denver. His name was Russell Adkins, CEO of Tri-Step Mobility Systems, a firm that had made mid-level powered wheelchairs for decades. "I admire your passion," he told her, shaking her hand stiffly. "But you're blowing up a system that supports thousands of jobs." Grace held his gaze. "I'm not trying to destroy. I'm trying to democratize. Same thing, from where I'm standing." He gestured around them. "We've spent years building partnerships with hospitals, insurers, rehab centers. You're bypassing all of that. Going straight to the consumer. Straight to the soul. That's powerful. And terrifying." Grace tilted her head. "So partner with us. Bring your expertise. We can evolve this industry together." He smiled, sadly. "The board won't allow that. They're too scared of you." "Then they're not scared of me," she said. "They're scared of change." That meeting didn't lead to a merger. But it gave Grace something else, clarity. This wasn't a glitch problem. It wasn't even a reputation problem. It was a story problem. People didn't trust what they didn't understand. So she doubled down on story. She launched Horizon Truthline, an open-access platform where users could post raw, unfiltered stories: what worked, what didn't, what needed fixing. The team responded publicly, line by line. It became a living dialogue. And slowly, people saw that transparency wasn't weakness. It was power. A month later, a major mobility advocacy group issued a statement: Horizon is not flawless. No system is. But it listens. It learns. And that makes it worthy of trust. By the end of the quarter, all chairs had been updated. 0 new incidents were reported. Regulatory pressure eased. But Grace didn't relax. She couldn't. Because trust wasn't something you earned once. It was something you earned daily. She stood before her team and said, "The next time we stumble, and there will be a next time, we don't panic. We own it, fix it, and build better. That's the protocol. Not for PR. For people." And that's how a glitch became a turning point. Not the collapse the critics predicted, but a test of character. And Horizon passed. The goal sounded absurd when Elon first said it aloud in a private meeting: 10 million Horizon chairs deployed globally by the end of the decade. Grace had paused, looked at him, and said, "That's not a target. That's a movement." And he had simply replied, "Exactly." By now, Horizon had become more than a device. It was a cultural force. It was taught in business schools as a case study in accessible design, referenced by economists as a model for inclusive distribution, and whispered about by legacy manufacturers who could no longer keep up with the speed, affordability, or ethos behind it. But 10 million? That was beyond disruption. That was infrastructure-level ambition. To hit the number, they would need to scale faster, smarter, and more ethically than anything Grace had ever been a part of. Mira led the logistics overhaul. Grace focused on global partnerships. Ravi took charge of software standardization and quality assurance. And Elon, uncharacteristically hands-off for months, reappeared to secure the funding round that would make it all possible. Tesla Mobility was restructured to become an open-license ecosystem. Select Horizon Tech, excluding the AI core, was made available to certified partners under strict quality terms. Factories in Poland, Vietnam, Kenya, and Chile were greenlit, each designed not just for output, but for local workforce empowerment. Grace personally oversaw the hiring standards, insisting on accessibility-first policies. No Horizon unit should be built in a space someone in a Horizon couldn't work, she said. And that changed everything. Factories were redesigned. Cafeterias modified. Bathrooms, break areas, assembly lines, all reimagined for true inclusion. The result? Productivity went up. Turnover went down. Worker satisfaction skyrocketed. In Rio, a woman named Luana, paralyzed from birth, became a factory floor supervisor, leading a team of 30. "I never thought I'd be the one making the chairs," she said to Grace, tears in her eyes. "You didn't just give me movement. You gave me purpose." Meanwhile, Tesla Mobility partnered with governments to streamline distribution. In India, Horizon chairs were integrated into the National Disability Program, with priority given to rural schools and clinics. In Eastern Europe, Horizon launched mobile outreach vans, solar-powered vehicles that could deliver, train, and service users in remote areas. And in the US, Horizon units began appearing in public libraries, bus stations, and even airports, available for short-term use via a scan-and-go app that was universally accessible. But perhaps the most significant expansion came from an unexpected alliance, with the United Nations Development Programme. UNDP saw Horizon not just as a mobility solution, but as a platform for broader inclusion, education, employment, healthcare access. Together, they launched the Movement for All initiative, a global framework to reach underserved populations and integrate Horizon deployment into broader human rights strategies. Grace was flown to Geneva to present the program. Standing before delegates from 130 nations, she didn't talk about specs or markets. She talked about a boy in Bangladesh who used Horizon to get to school for the first time. About a mother in Serbia who used the chair's AI assistant to return to teaching online. About an elder in the Arctic Circle who had lost his legs to frostbite but now patrolled his community again, offering wisdom and guidance from his Horizon 2.4. This isn't charity, she said. It's change. Measured not in profit, but in possibility. The room stood to applaud. But reaching 10 million required more than speeches. It required innovation. Horizon needed to evolve, cheaper to make, easier to service, smarter in terrain detection, and even more customizable. Ravi's team unveiled the Horizon Core redesign, modular, plug-and-play components with no tools required. Need a new armrest? Snap it in. Want to upgrade to all-terrain wheels? Click lock in seconds. The Solware AI was split into offline and online modes, allowing full functionality even in areas with zero internet access. Languages expanded to include over 140 dialects. Voice recognition now adapted to regional slang and speech patterns, trained by recordings from local users. But Grace wanted more. She wanted the chair to become a platform. So they partnered with third-party developers under a controlled open API. The result was staggering. In just 3 months, over 3,000 Horizon-compatible apps were created, ranging from farming tools to mobile banking interfaces, educational games to health monitoring dashboards. In Ghana, an app allowed Horizon users to report road conditions in real time, improving community accessibility mapping. In Norway, an app let users sync their chair movements to music and light shows. Eli, now 12, created his own simple Horizon app, a comic reader with a voiceover function he called Page Buddy. He presented it at his school science fair. It went viral. Grace added it to the core app library. You're part of this, she told him. Always. Public excitement surged again. Horizon chairs began appearing in music videos, film cameos, and political rallies. A Horizon user won a seat in the French parliament. Another ran a marathon-length Rollathon across Morocco to raise awareness for accessible infrastructure. Celebrities donated entire batches anonymously. One rapper posted, "I spent $100,000 on a chain. I could have bought 500 Horizons. I'm fixing that." But not everything was easy. They hit material shortages in East Asia that slowed production. A shipping strike caused a 2-week delay that left thousands waiting. In some places, political resistance re-emerged. If they move freely, they'll demand more rights, one leaked memo said. Grace didn't flinch. She launched Horizon Justice, a legal and advocacy arm supporting disability rights in countries where distribution triggered social pushback. Lawyers worked pro bono. Volunteers were trained to document discrimination. Local leaders were empowered. One town in Bosnia refused to allow Horizon units in schools. The next week, 50 students rolled in together, cameras rolling, press watching. The policy changed by morning. Back at Tesla Mobility HQ, the numbers climbed. 5 million. Then 6. A big jump after the UN partnership kicked in. They hit 7 million after partnering with regional mobility NGOs in West Africa. 8 million came faster than expected. Horizon was now a word that meant hope in over a dozen languages. Grace stayed grounded. She still visited factories. Still read user emails herself, late at night, sipping tea with Eli curled next to her on the couch. Her favorite message that month was from a 70-year-old man in rural Argentina who simply wrote, "You gave me back the sun." But 10 million? It still felt distant. Until one morning in late spring, Mira burst into Grace's office with tears streaming down her face and a printed dashboard screen in her hand. "We did it," she whispered. 10 million units shipped. Verified. 10 million lives moved. Grace didn't say anything at first. She just closed her eyes. She saw her old life, the pre-accident years, the silence that followed, the first prototype, the rejection, the hope, the noise, the critics, the believers. And now, 10 million people. Moving. She opened her eyes and said, "Then we celebrate." But quietly. "And then we go again. Because the road never ends. Not when movement is life." It didn't start with a headline or a speech or even a tweet. It started with a shift. A quiet one, the kind that sneaks in over time. City planners began redesigning sidewalks, not because of new laws, but because Horizon users had mapped every bump and curb, feeding that data into public systems. Schools built wider doors and lowered sinks without waiting for government grants, because administrators had met kids in Horizon chairs who demanded, and deserved, equal footing. Hospitals stopped referring to people as wheelchair-bound. Journalists replaced outdated language with phrases like mobility-enabled. The effect wasn't driven by politics or marketing. It came from the millions who rolled out into the world and simply refused to be invisible. They made eye contact. They told their stories. They worked. They played. They lived. And slowly, the world followed. Economists called it the Horizon Effect, a measurable increase in community resilience, employment, and public infrastructure investment in areas with high Horizon chair adoption. Entire regions saw boosts in productivity because people who'd once been confined to back rooms or dependent on caregivers now ran shops, taught classes, started families. Grace read one report that said communities with over 5% Horizon users showed statistically significant increases in empathy scores across all age groups. She laughed when she read that, not because it was funny, but because it made sense. Horizon didn't just change lives, it changed how people saw each other. In Chicago, a neighborhood mural project featured portraits of local Horizon users, painted by children who interviewed them first. In Turkey, a Horizon-inclusive orchestra performed in front of a packed stadium, violins balanced across lap trays, drums adapted to toe controls. A fashion label in Milan launched an entire accessible design line, modeled by wheelchair users rolling down neon-lit runways. One of them, a model named Zoe, told Vogue, "This chair didn't limit me. It leveled me up." Grace saw the echoes everywhere. In street signs. In cartoons. In conversations. A child pointing and asking their mother, "Can I ride one of those when I grow up?" with no stigma, just admiration. That was the Horizon Effect, disability no longer framed as deficit, but as difference. And difference as power. But impact wasn't just aesthetic. It was structural. By year 3, Horizon units had become one of the largest decentralized data networks in existence. With user consent, anonymized data from daily routes, environmental conditions, health indicators, and navigation patterns formed a living atlas of human resilience. Urban planning teams used it to identify underserved areas. Disaster relief agencies tapped into it during floods and wildfires, rerouting rescue plans based on where Horizon chairs were likely active. In Bangladesh, flood prediction models were improved because Horizon chairs were equipped with barometric sensors that relayed sudden pressure changes in vulnerable regions. In California, wildfire alert systems tied into Horizon's location mapping to ensure that evac plans included users automatically. Grace was invited to speak at MIT Center for Urban Intelligence. She stood in front of a room of engineers and said, "You want smart cities? Start by listening to the people who've been forced to navigate dumb ones their entire lives. They know the gaps. They've mapped the cracks." Her voice carried through the room. She was no longer the new face of mobility. She was the architect of its future. Still, there were skeptics. Some argued the Horizon ecosystem was becoming too dominant. Critics accused Tesla Mobility of creating a dependency economy. Others warned that open licensing could invite cheap knockoffs and quality erosion. Grace met every critique head-on. When local competitors emerged, she didn't sue, she offered them tech support and quality guidance. "We rise together," she told them. "Or we let fear win." When one government tried to tax Horizon units as luxury imports, Grace flew in, rolled into Parliament, and spent 3 hours explaining the economics of inclusion. The bill was overturned. When a rogue manufacturer released counterfeit chairs that failed under pressure, Grace issued a public warning, and Tesla quietly funded a replacement campaign for every affected user. No lawsuits, just resolution. She understood now. Being a leader meant protecting not just your brand, but your community. And the Horizon community was massive. Online forums flourished with stories, designs, hacks. A user in Morocco built a solar charging station out of scrap metal and posted the blueprint for free. A teenager in Ohio coded a game that could be played entirely through Horizon's joystick and sold 500,000 copies in 6 weeks. A non-profit in Vietnam used Horizon chairs to deliver mobile books to remote villages. Grace kept track of it all. She called it the Movement Archive. A digital time capsule of stories, videos, messages. Her favorite was still the one from the little girl in Texas who said, "My Horizon lets me race my dog. He always wins. But I'm catching up." That's what Horizon had become, a tool that let people catch up, with their dreams, with their communities, with the parts of life they'd been locked out of. But change wasn't just global. It was personal. Eli, now 13, had grown up alongside Horizon's rise. At school, he ran a peer support group called Motion Crew, helping new students with disabilities get comfortable in their Horizon chairs and with themselves. "You don't have to be fixed," he told them. "You just have to be seen." He'd inherited his mother's fire, and Grace sometimes watched him from the kitchen doorway, coaching someone through the app, calm and focused. "You're a natural," she'd say. "No," he'd reply with a grin. "I'm a Horizon kid." At Tesla Mobility, the team had grown from 200 to nearly 6,000. Grace made sure the leadership team remained diverse, grounded, and user-led. Every major decision required at least 3 user voices in the room. "No design without dignity," she'd repeat. The Horizon 3.0 prototype neared completion, lighter, faster, and fully modular, designed for both physical and cognitive accessibility. For users with limited speech, it had an AI speech generator trained on their past videos and recordings to replicate their tone. For users in extreme climates, it had adaptive insulation. For those in war zones, it had a safe mode that disabled tracking and scrambled location signals. Every user mattered. No exceptions. One morning, Grace got an email from a man in a Siberian village. He said his Horizon chair had let him teach again, despite the snow, the silence, the isolation. "You gave me back my students," he wrote. "You gave me my voice." She printed that email and taped it to her office door. The Horizon effect wasn't a flash in the pan. It was a movement with roots. With echoes. And it was only just beginning. The explosion happened at 3:14 a.m. local time in Nairobi. A Horizon microfactory, one of the earliest ever established, lit up the night sky as flames tore through the corrugated metal structure. It had taken 5 years to build, 10 minutes to lose, and a lifetime to feel. Grace woke to her phone vibrating non-stop, messages cascading in, Mira, Ravi, a dozen field engineers, local partners. No one was hurt. Thank God. But everything inside was gone: materials, components, software backups, printed chairs, prototypes, charging stations, even community artwork that had been hung on the walls. The fire department suspected arson. No proof yet, but whispers pointed toward an anti-Horizon extremist group that had been growing louder in recent months. Their manifesto called Horizon a threat to divine order. They'd posted grainy videos online, burning Horizon pamphlets, claiming the technology blurred the lines between man and machine. Grace stared at the footage in silence. It wasn't the destruction that shook her. It was the intention behind it. Horizon had always been built with resistance in mind, cultural resistance, regulatory resistance, even market resistance. But this? This was fear, weaponized. Not fear of technology. Fear of change. The next morning, she boarded a flight to Kenya. No press, no public announcement. Just her and a duffel bag, touching down into thick humidity and heavy hearts. The microfactory site was still smoldering. Fire crews sprayed foam over embers. Children peeked from behind fences. Community members gathered silently, some with Horizon chairs at their sides, others standing, arms crossed, eyes narrowed with grief and defiance. Grace walked the perimeter, inhaling smoke and memory. This place had been more than a production center. It had been a symbol. A lifeline. A revolution stitched into local soil. One of the workers, an amputee named Yusuf, approached her, his hands blackened with soot. "We lost the building," he said. "But not the blueprints. Not the know-how. Not the fight." Grace nodded slowly. "We rebuild," she said. "Better. Stronger. And louder." Within 48 hours, a temporary pop-up station had been set up in a donated community hall nearby. Engineers worked around the clock. Donations poured in. Volunteers from neighboring towns arrived on foot, eager to sort parts, translate instructions, deliver messages. Mira arrived from Mumbai with a backup server drive. Ravi uploaded the schematics from Berlin. The new building was already being designed. And this time, it would be fireproof. But the fire set off more than alarms. It sparked aftershocks around the globe, protests from fringe groups, online harassment campaigns, physical attacks on Horizon kiosks. In 3 countries, Horizon units were vandalized with paint and acid. A right-wing podcast called Horizon, a globalist plot to replace tradition. A social media thread accused Tesla of secretly collecting genetic data through the chairs. None of it was true, but that didn't stop the noise. Grace's personal inbox flooded with threats. Her home address was leaked. Photos of Eli were posted alongside mocking captions. The price of visibility. She sat with him one evening after school, the sun sliding down behind the hills, casting golden streaks across the kitchen tiles. "Some people are scared," she said. "They think helping others means losing something themselves." Eli looked up. "But that's not how it works." "No," she said softly. "It's not." He thought for a moment. "We should build them a horizon, too." She smiled, eyes wet. "That's exactly the point." Tesla increased its digital security protocols. Grace hired a small protective detail, not because she felt afraid, but because others needed her to stay safe. But she refused to disappear. She kept traveling. She kept speaking. She kept showing up. 1 week after the fire, she addressed a crowd of 3,000 at a global accessibility summit in Amsterdam. She didn't wear a suit or prepare a slide deck. She rolled onto the stage in a black t-shirt and jeans, the scorched remnants of a Horizon armrest on the table beside her. "This was once part of a chair," she said. "It helped someone reach work, hold a child, chase a dream. Someone burned it. But what they didn't know, what they'll never understand, is that we don't build movements from plastic and wires. We build them from purpose. And purpose doesn't burn." The audience stood in waves. After the summit, dozens of new allies pledged support, cities opened new grant channels, NGOs adopted Horizon distribution models, and a major international wheelchair brand agreed to share proprietary terrain data with Tesla, marking the first ever cross-company accessibility agreement. Grace turned the fire into a rallying cry. Internally, Tesla Mobility launched Project Ember, a protocol for recovery and rapid response in case of political or environmental targeting. Externally, they created Horizon Solidarity Packs, small, covert kits that allowed chairs to be assembled in countries with active anti-disability discrimination or conflict zones. These chairs were unbranded, untraceable, and fully functional. In Afghanistan, underground volunteers distributed them under the cover of night. In Syria, they were delivered in crates marked books. In one video smuggled out of a refugee camp, a child unwrapped a solidarity pack and whispered in Arabic, "I thought I was forgotten." Grace watched that video a dozen times. Each time, it filled her with equal parts fury and fire. They wouldn't win, the ones who tried to intimidate, to scare, to erase. They might slow her down. But they couldn't stop the tide. Because the horizon effect wasn't just measurable in numbers or headlines. It was visible in every stubborn, brilliant, unbreakable person who dared to roll into a world that had never made space for them, and claim it. The aftershocks faded slowly. Public sentiment shifted back. Media coverage reframed the fire as a cowardly attack on progress. Local officials vowed stronger protection for horizon spaces. But for Grace, the lesson was permanent. Change makes enemies. The deeper the change, the louder the backlash. But that was proof it mattered. One night, as a storm rolled over the bay, she sat at her desk, scrolling through footage of Horizon users gathered outside the burned factory. They were holding candles. Some raised their chairs like fists in the air. No speeches. No signs. Just presence. That's what resistance looked like now. Not rage. Not fear. But presence. And presence always prevails. The request came from an island nation Grace had never visited. Tuvalu. A scattering of Pacific islands already battered by the rising tides of climate change. The message was simple: our land is drowning. Can Horizon float? At first, she thought it was a miscommunication. Float. The Horizon chair had been tested in snow, sand, mud, and mountains, but water? It had never been built for aquatic use. But the request haunted her. So she read everything she could about Tuvalu, about its people, about the inches of sea level rise swallowing their roads and gardens and homes. She saw images of elders carried through water to reach clinics, students walking to school on sandbags, families building rafts from trash. These were not problems of the future. They were now. "Can we float?" she asked Ravi in a late-night call. There was a pause. Technically. Maybe. Safely. That's another story. We'd need to rethink the entire power distribution. Waterproof every component. Rework balance calibration for surface tension. It's not just terrain anymore, it's fluid dynamics. Then let's start. What began as a challenge became an obsession. Tesla Mobility launched Project Drift, a full division tasked with creating the world's first amphibious mobility device. The brief was clear: not a boat, not a wheelchair with pool wheels, a hybrid. Something that could move over dirt, dock, and deep water without missing a beat. They brought in marine engineers, indigenous experts, and climate scientists. They tested foam alloys, repurposed drone buoyancy tech, added self-righting features, and built a sealed propulsion system powered by microjets. By month 4, they had a prototype. It looked like something between a sleek dune buggy and a stealth kayak, but it had a Horizon soul, intuitive joystick, AI path prediction, fully solar rechargeable, and lighter than any standard model. Grace took it out herself in a flooded testing site outside New Orleans. The water came up to her knees as she rolled in, and then, lift. The chassis adjusted, the jets whispered to life, and the chair glided forward. Smooth. Controlled. Liberating. She laughed out loud. We can float. In Tuvalu, word spread quickly. The first 5 amphibious Horizon chairs were flown in under a partnership with the UN. The pilot users were fishermen, teachers, and a grandmother named Aisha who became the first person to commute daily by Horizon from her flooded home to the town health center. I used to wait for someone to carry me, she told Grace over a satellite call. Now I pass them. The impact went viral. Images of Horizon users cruising gently across flooded roadways spread across social media. Headlines called it the chair that conquered the sea. More orders poured in: Bangladesh, the Philippines, Indonesia, Louisiana. Anywhere water was winning. Horizon Drift became not just a chair, but a symbol of climate adaptation. It sparked new conversations about accessible design in a changing world. Governments asked, what else can we do differently if we start with mobility? In Jakarta, flood-prone schools integrated amphibious Horizon docks. In Venice, planners added wheelchair ramps to gondola stations for the first time. Horizon's amphibious model became a new standard, not just for accessibility, but for resilience. And Grace? She found herself more in the water than out. Traveling to river deltas, coastal cities, floating villages. Learning how people lived on the edge of land. In Bangladesh, a boy named Tariq showed her how he'd customized his Horizon with fishing gear and waterproof speakers. I catch more fish than my uncle, he said proudly. In Louisiana, she rode with a jazz musician named Moses who played live saxophone from his amphibious chair while drifting past tourists on canal walks. I don't wait for a stage, he said. I bring the stage with me. These stories weren't just feel-good. They were proof. Proof that the same chair helping kids go to school in Kansas could also help a woman plant rice in waist-deep water in Myanmar. Grace gave a TED Talk titled Designing for a Planet That Moves. She said, disability isn't the problem. Inflexible design is. The world changes, so must we. By then, Horizon Drift had reached 200,000 units. Small compared to standard Horizon models, but mighty. Especially when storms hit. When Cyclone Hadaira struck the Pacific coast, emergency teams used amphibious Horizons to deliver medicine to stranded homes. In Puerto Rico, Horizon chairs helped evacuate flood zones where boats couldn't navigate narrow streets. And in Tuvalu, when another king tide washed through the main village, Aisha rolled through it like she was walking on air. The world took notice. Climate response agencies began issuing Horizon units as part of relief kits. NGOs revised emergency plans to include amphibious mobility support. A coalition of coastal cities formed, Floating Access, a network sharing strategies for Horizon-enabled evacuation, education, and employment during flooding. But even as the chair floated, resistance remained. Critics accused Tesla of exploiting tragedy. Some environmental groups questioned the carbon footprint of production. Grace addressed them directly. Every Horizon chair is carbon net zero within 1 year of daily use. We build in factories powered by renewables. We offset every shipment. And we make our designs open to local builders. This isn't about optics. It's about options. When pressed on cost, she pointed out, an inaccessible disaster zone costs more than any chair we've ever made. Internally, the Drift team continued to innovate. The 2.0 model included satellite GPS in case of emergency, a desalination straw clip for safe drinking water, and improved solar panels that charged 30% faster in low light. They even added a version with a built-in mesh net that collected microplastics as the chair moved through polluted water. Mobility with a mission, Ravi called it. But for Grace, the real mission was human. One afternoon, while visiting a temporary Horizon repair dock in the Mekong Delta, she sat beside an old man fixing his granddaughter's chair. He was humming, slow and low. "You don't speak my language," he said, looking at her with a smile. "But this chair does." She nodded, tears welling. He was right. Horizon had become a language. A way to say, you belong here. You can go. You are not stuck. Not anymore. Not ever again. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough.